Hi, my name is Danielle Neer, and today I'm going to be talking about my paper on the misappropriation of American Indian culture. First off, cultural misappropriation is the inappropriate adoption of cultural aspects of one society by members of another society. This can be seen throughout our society, and many different ethnic groups and races have been misappropriated throughout our history, and even today. In this paper, I'm discuss how different Native Americans have been culturally misappropriated and the various causes for these actions. The misrepresentation of Native culture goes all the way back to when the first European settlers came to the Americas. When they first arrived, they saw all of these Native people, and instead of trying to understand them or learn about their cultures and their traditions, they decided to invade and take over their lands without any regard to the communities that they were destroying. This poor treatment continued through American settlement and expansion, which explains why people continue to have such negative opinions of Native people throughout history, as seen in films and music. In my paper, I also talk about how Americans held different opinions at different time periods throughout our history. For example, in the 1930s, the film industry began making westerns where natives were portrayed as savages, and it sort of showed them as the bad guys against the cowboys in these films. I also discussed how that opinion then shifted going into the 1960s as we moved into the civil rights movement. During this time, they were shown as heroes and represented freedom in the films of this time, and they were used to represent other groups who were oppressed as well. During this time as well, people also started to kind of imitate Native American culture, with the emergence of the hippies. They would dress, with the headbands, and they looked similar to how they believed Native Americans dressed, because they wanted to, further represent this image of freedom that they believed these people had. These two different time periods show how Americans formed their opinions of Native Americans through the movies they were seeing. Instead of actually getting to know Native people or even learn about all of the different indigenous nations, their specific cultures and traditions, people learn through the film and music industries. The problem with trying to understand a culture or group of people through these forms of entertainment is that people are not usually properly educated on the topic, so they're not able to actually represent these people in the correct manner. And this is due to all of the examples that they have seen throughout history, and the examples they have seen that were set by early forms of entertainment as well. As a result, we end up seeing one version of what Native Americans are supposed to look like, and don't get to see all of the different nations represented, in their different cultural aspects. This is also described in the Real and June movie that analyzed how Native people have been portrayed in the film industry throughout history, and it explains how the movies makes them all Plains Indians, but even still, many of these details are incorrect about Plains Indians. One of the earliest forms of American entertainment is another big reason why Americans misappropriate certain cultures. In the early minstrel shows, African Americans were played by white actors, and they made Americans even more accepting of slavery, since this is what they were being shown in all of the productions of this time. And it gave them a poor and inaccurate idea about African American people and their culture. And the popularity of these shows led to African American characters to be known as Jim Crow in these types of productions, which served as a stereotype for African American people, and that name is now associated with a set of laws from that time that allowed slavery. Overall, those early types of shows really did give a negative image, and it did follow, throughout history, and even today people know, of these Jim Crow laws as well. And this same type of misrepresentation is what we see when people are singing Red Face and playing Indian, in these movies and songs as well. And these types of portrayals are not true representations of these groups of people, but their popularity allowed them to become the mainstream way that Americans viewed these indigenous people. In my paper, I discussed how these performances allowed white Americans to assert their dominance while minimizing these cultures and these people as well, through these types of productions. And I also discussed a song as an example of singing Red Face and this cultural misappropriation. The song I chose was Tim McGraw's Indian Outlaw, and even though the song became pretty popular, it also received many complaints due to the lyrics. Part of the reason it was so popular among Americans was because he combined the cowboy and the Indian persona into this one person. And the reason for the cowboy being so popular was because of the popularity of the Western films back in the 1930s, which are viewed as classic films today. The negative feedback of this song was due to the extremely stereotypical nature of the lyrics. Instead of trying to tell a story about a Native American man, the lyrics used almost every stereotype you could think of to describe this Indian outlaw, using phrases such as living in his wigwam, getting in trouble with the medicine man, smoking his peace pipe, and playing on his tom-tom, and which the tom-tom is not actually a type of drum that is used in Native American music, which further goes to show how, people get these false ideas of what Native Americans are like in their heads, and they depict them in these ways. Part of the issue with how Tim McGraw describes himself as this Indian outlaw in his song is because he is not actually Native, but just by saying he is an Indian in the song shows how people believe that this kind of behavior is acceptable. Just because he's saying he is Native in the song makes it okay for him to say all of these things and use all of these stereotypes, and it's not. The music video is also a little bit stereotypical. During the scenes where they show him as the Indian outlaw, they show him riding around on his, what they call, Indian motorcycle with his Chippewa girlfriend, which is just a really stereotypical way to depict the Native American in the song. And then after looking at all the different causes and examples of this misrepresentation of Native Americans in our society, it is obvious that a change needs to be made so that these people can be better represented. There are some indigenous people who have started to make their way into the film and music industries, and they use their work to appropriately describe Native people, using more specific details from different nations and actually using accurate facts and not these stereotypes that everyone has learned, over the years. Some of these artists as well have even, used their music and their stance as well to advocate for different issues that Native people face today, such as some of the people we saw in the film about rebel music. Inez Jasper, she advocated for, crimes against Native women. And then Frank Wallen as well was advocating for the land preservation and all of the issues with the pipeline that was supposed to be built through their land and things like that. Ultimately, I do believe that if more and more people like this are able to, get out there and be heard in our society, then overall people will hopefully gain a better understanding and be more driven to learn about these, different and unique cultures, and just really gain that better understanding of Native American culture and do a better job representing them, in music, film, and just all aspects of society, even with sports teams and in education as well, because kids in school often don't learn about this mistreatment. They just learn about the colonization of America when they maybe should be taught a little bit about, this mistreatment. That way they don't grow up having these same false ideas that everyone has previously learned and things like that. So that's all that I have, and I really hope you enjoy reading my paper.